The Bastille's most feared weapon wasn't a cannon or a blade. It was a wax seal. Break it, and everyone would know. Roman sentries guarded their camps with something almost as flimsy, a wooden tablet with a word scratched on it. Neither one could stop a determined enemy by force. And yet, for centuries, both worked. This video is about why the flimsiest-looking security in history was often the most effective. Picture yourself guarding a gate. It's night. You have no name badges, no photographs, no way to call ahead and confirm who's coming. All you have is a question you can ask, and an answer you're hoping is correct. That's the entire problem, stripped down to its simplest form. How do you let the right person through, and only the right person, when you can't personally vouch for everyone standing in front of you? It sounds like a small problem. It isn't. Every group that ever grew past the size of a village ran straight into this wall. Armies, palaces, prisons, and eventually, computers. When everyone knows everyone, trust happens automatically. Nobody has to think about it. But the moment a group grows past the point where people can recognize each other by face, trust can't stay personal anymore. It has to become a system. A procedure that works even when the person checking has never met the person standing in front of them. That's why this mattered so much historically. An army camp with thousands of soldiers couldn't rely on sentries recognizing every face in the dark. A king couldn't personally verify every person locked away in his prisons. And it's why the exact same problem showed up centuries later in a completely different form. The moment a computer went from serving one person to serving many, at MIT in 1961, that old wall reappeared, except this time it was built out of code instead of stone. And here's what makes this problem genuinely difficult. In every single era it's shown up. Whatever proof you hand someone has to be simple enough to use quickly. A guard can't interrogate every soldier for 10 minutes before letting them pass. But that same simplicity is exactly what makes the proof easy to steal, copy, or fake. Ease and exposure pull in opposite directions. And that tension is the thread this entire story pulls on. Rome had a problem no army before it had to face at scale. How do you tell friend from enemy in a camp holding thousands of men, in the dark, when a single mistake could mean death? The answer wasn't clever technology. It was a small piece of wood. Each evening, according to the historian Polybius, a soldier called the Tesserarius was sent to the tribune's tent to receive a wooden tablet called a tessera. Written on it was the knight's password. From there, it was passed hand to hand through the camp, unit by unit, until every position had received it. This wasn't a casual arrangement. The role of Tesserarius existed specifically to manage this process, and a sentry who mishandled the password wasn't seen as forgetful. He was seen as a weak point in the entire camp's defense, and Roman military discipline treated failures like that with real severity. Notice what this system was actually built to do. It wasn't trying to create an unbreakable secret. It was trying to control two things: who received the password, and how obvious it would be if something went wrong. The tablet had to move through a specific chain of hands, in a specific order, which meant any break in that chain would be noticeable. France's Bastille solved a related but different version of this problem centuries later. A lettre de cachet was a sealed order, personally signed by the king and closed with the royal wax seal, authorizing someone's imprisonment without trial. The seal wasn't decoration. It was proof that the letter hadn't been opened or altered before it reached the official responsible for carrying it out. Break the seal, and anyone downstream would immediately know the order had been tampered with. Prisoners held under these orders were also bound by an oath of silence about their own imprisonment, extending the same logic of controlled information from the document to the person. Both systems accepted something important. Neither the wooden tablet nor the wax seal could physically stop a determined, skilled enemy. A password can be overheard. A seal can eventually be forged by someone skilled enough. What both systems actually protected against was casual interception, and they made tampering visible after the fact, even when they couldn't prevent it in the moment. That distinction, between stopping an attack and detecting one, turns out to matter more than it sounds like it should. 18 centuries after Rome, and roughly 3 centuries after the Bastille, the same wall reappeared. Except this time, there was no wood, no wax, and no guard standing physically at the gate. In 1961, a computer scientist named Fernando Corbato was part of the team at MIT building something called the Compatible Time-Sharing System, or CTSS. For the first time, Multiple researchers could use the same mainframe computer at once, instead of waiting in line to run their programs one at a time. But this created a new version of the old problem. Everyone shared the same machine and the same disk. Without some way to separate their work, anyone could open anyone else's files. The solution was the password. But it's worth being precise about why it was introduced, because it wasn't built as a fortress. Corbateau later said passwords were meant to protect against what he called casual snooping, not serious attackers. Each researcher was given a set amount of computer time per week, and a password simply kept one person's files separate from another's. It was closer to a locker key than a vault door. And almost immediately, the system ran into the same failure Rome had already lived through. CTSS stored its passwords as plain text, meaning anyone who accessed that file could read every password on the system. At one point, a bug in the software accidentally printed out the entire password file for every user. Separately, a graduate student named Alan Scher later admitted that after his access privileges were reduced, he found a way to print the full list of passwords himself and used them to keep working on the system without permission. Look closely at that story, and it's not really a new kind of failure. It's the same one Rome had already discovered, just wearing different clothes. An overheard password in a Roman camp and a printed password file at MIT are the same vulnerability. Not the security failing under attack from outside, but the credential leaking out through the very system meant to protect it. This is also why modern password systems evolved the way they did. Techniques like hashing and salting, which scramble stored passwords so they can't be read even if the file is exposed, and multi-factor authentication, which requires more than one piece of proof, exist because that original weakness never actually disappeared. It was inherited. A wooden tablet, a wax seal, and a line of text on a screen look nothing alike. But underneath, they were never really three different inventions. They were one idea, discovered three separate times, by people who had no knowledge of each other. So what is a password actually, underneath the object carrying it? Strip away the material, and every one of these systems reduces to the same four moving parts. A secret or token that proves something. A controlled channel for handing that secret to the right people. A verification step at the moment someone tries to get through. And a consequence for failing that verification. A Roman watchword, a sealed royal letter, and a CTSS login all fit this same skeleton. Only the materials change. What becomes wax becomes text on a screen. Once you see that skeleton, the similarities between these systems stop looking like coincidence and start looking predictable. All three relied on a shared secret instead of personal recognition, trust handed off to a token rather than a face. All three had someone specifically responsible for controlling that token, the Tesserarius managing the watchword, the minister countersigning the royal seal, the system administrator managing the password file. And all three failed in the same way. Not through brute force from an outsider, but through an insider or an intercepted copy. Alan Scher printing the password list is structurally the same event as a bribed guard passing along a watchword, or a forged seal slipping past inspection. Different centuries, same failure. But the differences matter just as much, and forcing these systems to match perfectly would actually make the comparison less accurate, not more. The stakes were wildly different. A compromised Roman watchword put a military camp at risk for a night. A lettre de cachet could remove a person's freedom indefinitely, with no trial and often no explanation given to anyone. A compromised CTSS password risked a research file. Same mechanism, completely different consequences. The renewal cycle differed too. Roman watchwords changed nightly. Records from Roman desert forts show passwords rotating on a weekly basis. CTSS passwords, once set, often weren't changed at all, which is arguably a step backward in security discipline, not forward, despite being the more technologically advanced system. And there's a difference in what was actually being kept secret. The Bastille's power came largely from concealing that an imprisonment had happened at all. The existence of the act itself was hidden. Roman watchwords and computer passwords work differently. They don't hide that access exists. They hide only the key needed to get that access. That's a meaningfully different kind of secrecy, and collapsing the two into the same idea would overstate the comparison. Which brings up something that runs underneath every one of these stories, something bigger than a comparison between old and new technology. None of these systems were ultimately defeated by an outsider breaking in by force. Rome's watchword system depended on soldiers who could, in theory, be bribed or coerced into repeating it. The Bastille sealed orders depended on officials who could, in theory, be paid to misuse them. And CESS depended on researchers who had already been granted legitimate access to the system in the first place. In every case, the person who ended up bypassing the system wasn't a stranger at the gate. They were already inside it. That reframes what these three stories are actually about. They were never really contests between a lock and an outside attacker. They were tests of the people who were handed the key. A password, a seal, or a watchword is not a wall. It's a piece of trust converted into an object and handed to someone. Its strength was never really about the wood, the wax, or the encryption behind it. It was about whether the people holding that trust could be relied on to protect it. This is part of why modern security engineering treats insider threats and credential handling as central problems, not minor footnotes. It's not a new discovery. It's the same lesson Roman military command and the French monarchy had already learned, centuries apart, through the same kind of failure. The technology keeps changing. Wood, wax, and text strings are interchangeable stand-ins for each other. But the underlying problem, how much trust to place in the people who control access, has never actually changed at all. So here's the question worth sitting with. Every system in this video was eventually broken not by an outsider, but by someone who was already trusted. So, where do you think that same weak point is hiding today? Not in your passwords, in the people who hold them. Drop your best example below.